Over the last few weeks, I've been asking you to research a little bit about the Holocaust, what it was, who was involved, why it was so horrible, why we continue to study it, why we must remember it. And a large part of our study is going to involve Anne Frank. And Anne is the girl pictured right here. She was a Jewish child living during World War II. And as you learned, as Hitler started to round up the Jewish people and a variety of other people, he would send them to these camps that were basically death camps. And so many families and many people fled the country or they went into hiding. And Anne and her family is one family that went into hiding that is remembered today mostly for Anne's diary and what she wrote about while she was in hiding. So I'm going to try to take you through an introduction to the skills we're going to be thinking about and working on as we read the story, as well as introducing you to the story. So, when we talk about character traits, the other day I asked you for your attendance question a character trait of your advisor. And I did that because I wanted you to start thinking about character traits. Character traits are personality traits, they're ways that you would describe someone. For example, cruel, arrogant, generous, courageous, humble, clever, funny, serious. Those are all characteristics or traits that you would use to describe a person. Think of the idea of characters being built out of these traits when a character is created. And there's two different types of characterization and two different ways for people to find out about traits. One is direct characterization, where you are directly told about the character's trait, like Mr. Gray is a cruel person. And the next one is indirect, where you're shown something about the character. As a reader, you have to infer that. You have to try to figure out what they mean. For example, Mr. Gray kicked the adorable puppy and laughed as it whimpered, shows that Mr. Gray is a real jerk. That's indirect characterization. As we are studying indirect characterization, we're going to be using this method called STEAL, STEAL. When an author uses indirect characterization, he must steal the character's traits from the information the author shows us. We must steal. And so, what we do is we think about um, what does the character say? What does the character think? How does the character affect other people? What does a character do and what does a character look like? And if you look at all that together, it stands for or spells out STEAL. So speech, thoughts, effects on others, actions, and looks. And these are the ones that we are going to be focusing on, specifically on speech, effects, and actions as we read the play. So I'm going to take you through each one a little bit more closely with some funny examples. Speech is what a character says that reveals their traits. If Frank said, "You are fat and ugly," to the little old lady, Frank is a jerk. That's what we can infer. The text doesn't say that he's a jerk, but we can infer or figure that out based on what he said. If Frank thinks to himself, "I can't wait to get home and give my little brother a wedgie," we can infer that he's mean. So the trait would be mean. So far we've got two traits to describe him. He's a jerk and he's mean. Effects on others. How does how do other characters respond to a character? After Frank left the room, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. So other people's actions, the effect he has on other people, we can infer that he is not likable. So we've now got he's a jerk, he's mean, and he's not likable. Never once did the text say that, but just by making inferences through characterization, we can figure that out. Action is the next one. We already had um, some kicking of the puppy, but here's another one. At lunch, Frank dug his finger into his nostril all the way up to his second knuckle, and then withdrew the digit to examine what he had found. We can infer that Frank has poor manners. Doesn't say he does, but that's a trait that we can see by the fact that he picked his nose in lunch and then looked at it and picked his nose severely. All right, and the last one is looks, the way a character looks. how a character looks can help us to understand them a little bit better as well. And I'm sorry about the text trying to fit all this in. But Frank was dressed in tight leather pants, a silk shirt open at the throat to reveal a collection of sparkling gold necklaces, and purple ostrich skin cowboy boots with silver caps on the toes. And we can infer with that one that Frank is very conceited. He's very rude. He thinks he's all that because he's walking around in that outfit. So, again, these are all examples of indirect characterization. And that's what we're going to be looking for when we read the play, The Diary of Anne Frank. Let me give you another example. If you consider this comic, how'd you like to be a bear, Garfield? Every winter you could sleep 4 months straight. Garfield thinks to himself, don't be ridiculous. And then he falls asleep. John, his buddy, says, yeah, that would be cutting back, wouldn't it? So think about what Garfield says or thinks that tells us about him. He doesn't really say anything, but he thinks, don't be ridiculous. Think about what that says about Garfield. What character trait does that show us? I'm going to pause for a second so you can think about it. And then what does Garfield do that tells us about him? What is his action? His action is he falls down and falls asleep. Think for a moment. What does that tell us about Garfield? What traits? And then finally, what does John say to Garfield that tells us about Garfield? So John says, how'd you like to be a bear? You could sleep. That would be cutting back, wouldn't it? Those two things that John says to him, what does that tell us about Garfield? All right, so when we think about what he says or thinks, the fact that he says, don't be ridiculous, kind of shows us that he's a little bit over John. He doesn't have a very patient personality. His characteristics are very annoyed. Um, he's kind of over whatever John has to say because he says, "Don't be ridiculous." He may even think that John's dumb. What does Garfield do? He falls asleep, and that tells us that he is probably pretty lazy. And if you know the comic, you would know that's true. And then what does John say to Garfield? Well, he talks about how he'd be able to sleep for 4 months straight, and that would be cutting back. So, what John says to him shows us that he, again, is pretty lazy. He likes to sleep a lot. So, these all show different types of indirect characterization. Now, bringing that back to the play, as we're reading the play, and we'll kind of talk through this as we go, you're going to try to use Steele to take notes on your script and try to find one example of steel per scene. So you'll see how the play is split into scenes, and some scenes are just a couple of pages and some are several pages. It might help you as we start to get into the story to focus on just one particular character that you want to follow to show examples of steel. You're going to underline each example and write the trait that's shown about the character through this example. So if you have a character in the play that does something really cruel, maybe they say something really mean to another character, you might underline that. And in the margin, you could say, this shows that the character is mean. The better notes you take, the easier your summative will be because your summative, the whole first part of it is all characterization, and the second part is partially characterization. So again, it's up to you to take the notes, but you'll get to use your script on your assessment. So the better notes you have, the better off you'll be. And again, I'll walk you through this as we go. I'll kind of model how to take notes, and we'll do a few together. But let's dig into the diary. First of all, Anne's diary was given to her as a present for her 13th birthday from her father, and she used it to express her life, her feelings, what she was going through. Think about that. She's 13. Think about what you're going through and all the things that you experience and all the things that you feel and all the things that even your body goes through. And she wrote about all of that in her diary. It was recovered and returned to her father after the war, and then translated into several books, a play, and a screenplay. And arguably, it's the most famous diary of all time. Now, her dad, um, as you will see, survived the war, and he took the diary and turned it into um, a book, and he helped write the screenplay and the play that we're actually going to read. He had a part in writing that. And so you have to remember that although Anne was very honest in her diary, what we are going to read is Mr. Frank's version of it, what he would like the world to see regarding Anne's thoughts and feelings. Now, Anne went into hiding, as we talked about earlier, with her family, but she also went into hiding with some other people. And so this is just a list of who's who in the play. Her father's name is Otto Frank, her mother's name is Edith, and then she had one older sister named Margot. Some versions call her Margot, and some of them call her Margot. It's up to you how you want to pronounce it. She was 16 when they entered the annex, and Anne was 13 when they entered the annex. And then these characters actually had a slightly different name. Herman and Petronella Van Dan are not their real names. Their names were changed. We don't really know why their names were changed. I'm assuming to protect the identity of them. But their actual name, their last name was Van Pell or Vandel, depending upon which way you are pronouncing it. And then they had a son named Peter. So Herman, Petronella, and Peter. Peter was 15, right in between the ages of Anne and Margot. And then finally, Mr. Dussel. He was a family dentist, and he was single and he needed a place to stay. And so we will see in the diary that he ends up joining them as well. And then they had two, because you can't go into hiding for an extended amount of time and not have somebody to help you, somebody to bring you supplies, somebody to give you news of the outside world and so forth. And the two helpers were Meep and Mr. Krayler. And Meep is the character that we see more. Meep is a female. She worked for Mr. Frank, and she continues to help him throughout the time that they are in hiding. And then Mr. Krayler is another person who helped. So at this point, we do have an assignment, and you have a couple of choices. The first part of the assignment is to read Act 1 and Scene 1, which is about 2 pages long. You can read it, or you can listen to me read it to you. If you want to listen to me, don't turn the Screencastify off, because I will continue to read it to you. If you don't want to read it or don't want to hear me read it, you can read it to yourself, but just keep in mind that you are responsible for this. And we will have occasional reading quizzes as we go throughout this story, where I'm asking you without looking at the script to answer some questions about what you've read. So please make sure that you're keeping up on your reading. The second part of your assignment is to complete the Ed puzzle on today's Google Classroom post. So again, you've got two assignments, to read Act 1, Scene 1, and to complete the Ed puzzle on Google Classroom. The Ed puzzle will take you about 5 to 10 minutes, and reading Act 1, Scene 1 will take you about 5 to 10 minutes. So you may finish this in class, you may not. It depends on how quickly you read. All right, at this point, if you would like to read on your own, you may pause or turn off the screencast. If you would not like to read it on your own, if you want to listen to me, then go ahead and pull out your script and follow along as I read you Act 1, Scene 1. The Diary of Anne Frank. The characters are listed up at the top. The time, July 1942 to August 1944 and November of 1945. The place, Amsterdam in the Netherlands. The scene remains the same throughout the play. It is the top floor of a warehouse and office building in Amsterdam, Holland. The sharply peaked roof of the building is outlined against a sea of other rooftops, stretching away into the distance. Nearby is the belfry of a church tower, the Westertoren. whose Caroline rings out the hours. Occasionally faint sounds float up from below, the voices of children playing in the street, the tramp of marching feet, a boat whistle from the canal. The 3 rooms of the top floor and a small attic space are exposed to our view. The largest of the rooms is in the center, with 2 small rooms slightly raised on either side. On the right is a bathroom out of sight. A narrow, steep flight of stairs at the back leads up to the attic. The rooms are sparsely furnished with a few chairs, cots, a table or two. The windows are painted over or covered with makeshift blackout curtains. In the main room, there is a sink, a gas ring for cooking, and a wood-burning stove for warmth. The room on the left is hardly more than a closet. There is a skylight in the sloping ceiling. Directly under this room is a small, steep stairwell with steps leading down to a door. This is the only entrance from the building below. When the door is opened, we see that it has been concealed on the outer side by a bookcase attached to it. Act 1, Scene 1. The curtain rises on an empty stage. It is late afternoon, November 1945. The rooms are dusty, the curtains in rags, chairs and tables are overturned. The door at the foot of the small stairwell swings open. Mr. Frank comes up the steps into view. He is a gentle, cultured European in his middle years. There is still a trace of German accent in his speech. He stands looking slowly around, making a supreme effort at self-control. He is weak, ill. His clothes are threadbare. After a second, he drops his rucksack on the couch and moves slowly about. He opens the door to one of the smaller rooms and then abruptly closes it again, turning away. He goes to the window at the back, looking aft at the Westertoren as its carillon strikes the hour of 6. Then he moves restlessly on. From the street below, we hear the sound of a barrel organ and children's voices at play. There is a many-colored scarf hanging from a nail. Mr. Frank takes it, putting it around his neck. As he starts back for his rucksack, his eye is caught by something lying on the floor. It is a woman's white glove. He holds it in his hand, and suddenly all of his self-control is gone, and he breaks down crying. We hear footsteps on the stairs. Miep Gies comes up, looking for Mr. Frank. Miep is a Dutch girl of about 22. She wears a coat and hat, ready to go home. She is pregnant. Her attitude toward Mr. Frank is protective, compassionate. "Are you all right, Mr. Frank?" "Yes, Miep, yes. Everyone in the office has gone home. It's after 6. Don't stay up here, Mr. Frank. What's the use of torturing yourself like this?" "I've come to say goodbye. I'm leaving here, Miep." "What do you mean? Where are you going? Where?" "I don't know yet. Haven't decided." "Mr. Frank, you can't leave here. This is your home. Amsterdam is your home. Your business is here waiting for you. You're needed here. Now that the war is over, there, there are things that I can't stay in Amsterdam, Miep. It has too many memories for me. Everywhere there's something. The house we lived in, the school, that street organ playing out there. I'm not the person you used to know, Miep. I'm a bitter old man. Forgive me. I shouldn't speak to you like this. After all that you did for us, the suffering." "No, no, it wasn't suffering. You can't say we suffered." "I know what you went through, you and Mr. Kraler. I'll remember it as long as I live. Come, Miep." "Mr. Frank, did you see? There are some papers here. We found them in a heap of rubbish on the floor after after you left." "Burn them." "But Mr. Frank, there are letters, notes." "Burn them, all of them." "Burn this?" Anne's diary. Monday, the 6th of July, 1942. 1942. Is it possible, Miep? Only 3 years ago? Dear Diary, since you and I are going to be great friends, I will start by telling you about myself. My name is Anne Frank. I am 13 years old. I was born in Germany the 12th of June, 1929. As my family is Jewish, we immigrated to Holland when Hitler came to power. My father started a business importing spice and herbs. Things went well for us until 1940. Then the war came, and the Dutch capitulation, followed by the arrival of the Germans. Then things got very bad for the Jews. You could not do this and you could not do that. They forced father out of his business. We had to wear yellow stars. I had to turn in my bike. I couldn't go to a Dutch school anymore. I couldn't go to the movies or ride in an automobile or even on a streetcar and a million other things. But somehow we children still managed to have fun. Yesterday, father told me we were going into hiding. Where? He wouldn't say. At 5 o'clock this morning, mother woke me and told me to hurry and get dressed. I was to put on as many clothes as I could. It would look too suspicious if we walked along carrying suitcases. It wasn't until we were on our way that I learned where we were going. Our hiding place was to be upstairs in the building where father used to have his business. 3 other people were coming in with us, the Van Dans and their son Peter. Father knew the Van Dans, but we had never met them. And then during the last lines, the curtain would rise on the scene, the lights would dim, and Anne's voice would fade out. So that is the end of scene one. As you can tell from the scene, this is at the end of the war. It's November 1945. We know, just because we may know the history, that Mr. Frank has survived and no one else has. And so he has gone back to where they were in hiding to meet up with Meep. And she, of course, hands him the diary, and it ends with him reading the entry. As we go into scene two, we're going to pick up on their very first day. So the rest of the play, other than the very last scene as well, is a flashback to earlier when they are actually in hiding. So again, scene one and then the very last scene of the play are further on beyond the war. The rest of the play is a flashback to the war. So that's the end of the reading for today. If you stayed to listen to me, again, you have a two-part assignment. So Act 1, Scene 1 is done. All you need to do is go on to Google Classroom and complete the Ed puzzle. And I will see you tomorrow.